The Battle is the Lord's. Part 5 is the title of our message, taken from 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verses 48 to 58. We are at the second thought. The Lord saveth not with sword. Verse 48. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Here we see the engagement between David and Goliath. The battle is going to change, tilt the balance between Israel and the Philistines. And this battle would be pivotal, and this engagement was a pivotal engagement that would determine the near future of the welfare of the people of Israel, to fulfill God's will, to remove the Philistines and their influence, the idolatrous influence in the land. Goliath was a giant. He was a big man. And the battle is an unequal battle. The warrior has all the credentials of an experienced warrior. And his opponent was one without military experience, one who can hardly be called a soldier. He was not even drafted. He was not enlisted into the army. And yet there he was facing the enemy, not the weakest of them, but the strongest of all of them. The battle was not of man. The battle was of the Lord. And the battle has to be fought in order that His ways may be advanced, His glory may be advanced according to His goodwill for the world. And so here you see the battle before us. Verse 48. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. He was not fearful, but the battle required him to move forward in spite of the threat and the strength of the enemy. And so here you see him hasting, running, and he was what Matthew Henry observed as lightly clad. He didn't have an armor, unlike the giant. The giant was fortified all over him. He had all the protection that was needed to fight the battle. Whereas for the servant of God, the battle, he was engaged in the battle without any apparent physical armor. But you realize that his armor is of the Lord. And in a spiritual battle, you realize that the battle is the Lord's, and the instruments for victory is the Lord's. Not with horses, not with chariots, but the way of the Lord. And this, we are going to see it before our eyes. And Israel For the nation of Israel, this was not the first time that they see the power of God manifesting in that time of crisis. Well, their nation began, you recall, when God parted the Red Sea so that the Egyptians in the land of Ham were distanced from them. They all were drowned in the Red Sea after the waters fell over them. And they entered the promised land, crossing the Jordan on dry land. And the Lord led them to conquer Jericho, the first fruit of Canaan, by an unusual strategy. You recall, they marched one round for 6 days, and the seventh day, seventh round, and they shouted, and then the walls of Jericho fell down. That was how Israel entered Canaan. And the battle was to be fought, and they are to possess the land. They are to conquer the land. And it has taken them almost 200 over years later, before this new battle between David and the Philistines. Of course, when we started the book of Samuel, we see how Israel's spiritual life has deteriorated. They needed to see their king, or they needed to see to believe. Well, that was their Achilles heel, isn't it? They didn't have faith, but to trust God, the invisible God. But they would like God to be like the gods of the world, whom they could see, but not that powerful. And because of their weak faith, they didn't realize what they were getting themselves into. And so they demanded a king, and God gave them the king. Saul was the first king, but Saul was not up to the battle. It was at that time when the battle was to be fought that the enemy came and confronted Israel. And here it is, the battle that has to be fought, and the Lord will raise His own instrument for the battle. And this was the battle that is before us. Verse 49. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. The engagement involves a sling and a stone. And it's interesting that Goliath, who is armored from head to toe, would expose the forefront of his head. Why did he expose himself in this way? Well, that's where his eye is. Perhaps he was complacent, isn't it? To see that the enemy is just a weak little boy, no strength, no armor, no nothing. How it was a battle that shouldn't be. And so, is it complacency? Is it out of sheer pride, because he was an experienced soldier? He never lost any battle until that battle that took his life. It was to be a fatal blow upon him, and you just need one blow, isn't it? And the enemy would be defeated. And that is what the Lord did at the Garden of Eden, isn't it? The head of the serpent shall bruise the head of the woman shall bruise the The seed of the woman shall bruise the head of the serpent. The seed of the woman, that is the Lord Jesus Christ to come, is the solution that of God to engage the enemy. And Christ had to suffer. Christ had to die. And he had to suffer that apparent defeat in order that the enemy may be taken down. After Christ died, he rose again the third day. And in that battle, Satan was defeated. Christ was bruised in the heel, but Satan was crushed in the head. The battle was fought and won in the Garden of Eden. Well, the battle was fought and won when the Lord, before the fall, have already determined the solution, that Christ would have to come, and human history has to be played out. Human sin has to be glaringly exposed before us, so that when the day comes and we meet the Lord in heaven with all the angelic hosts, with the 24 elders and with the 4 angelic hosts, you would realize that everyone there would be fully clear in their heart concerning who God is, and they would give their absolute obeisance to the Lord. Honor and power and glory, all to Him, because they realize that it was a battle that they could not have fought. What did God do? Well, God sent His Son, and there was a sacrifice made. And that sacrifice defeated the enemy. Christ died. God had to come. And the angels, angelic hosts could not understand, isn't it? How God had to send His Son to come. And God, who made everything, right? He made everything. All things are at His disposal. Why does He have to suffer hunger? Why does He have to suffer thirst? Why does He have to weary Himself in preaching the gospel? Well, to truly convince men, isn't it, that there's no other support, there's no other one that would truly love them and take care of them and care for them. There is none except the Lord, you see, and He's the one who gives us life, and He gives us the one who sustains our life, and that if we do not understand what great sacrifice God had done to save us, so that when you are there in heaven, you realize that there was something that was done to break that power of the devil, to break the power of darkness. It was a great, immense darkness that has to be broken, but it will take great, immense sacrifice in order that this work can be fulfilled. In order that this work can be done, it has to be fulfilled. And David had to fight that battle. David had to go forth and meet the enemy. David had to go forth. David had to go forth in order to confront and ensure that the enemy, who is their champion, would have to be defeated. And to defeat the champion would be to defeat the entire Philistine army. Because later on you would see that they had no more strength to fight at all. They all fled. They ran. They turned their back and they ran. Because their champion, Goliath, who has the semblance of power and strength, if he is defeated, who else can fight and prevail? None can prevail, isn't it? And so the Philistines were defeated. They began to retreat. They began to withdraw. So our text tells us in verse 49 that David put his hand in his back and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, and that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So the blow was a fatal blow. His armor was off, and because his armor was off, his head armor was off. And because his head armor was off, he exposed the most vulnerable part of his body. So here you see in warfare, you realize that you need the whole armor of God, the helmet of salvation, to have a clear idea that once you are saved, once the Lord has given you spiritual life, the enemy cannot overtake you. Satan cannot possess you anymore. You belong to the Lord. And that is thorough and that's complete, and that we must not forget. You need the helmet of salvation. And well, we see Goliath being defeated because he had his helmet, at least the forefront of his head armor off, and that allowed David to deal the fatal blow. He could have hit his eye, he could have hit his nose, he could have hit his mouth, he could have hit any other place, but he hit the forehead because it was a weak point. And there, of course, it is also a strong one because that's where the skull is. The skull is also strong. But the strength of the stone, the speed of it was enough to crack and burst through the skull in order to kill the man. And so you can imagine the power of that sling, that stone that is hurled at a high speed, how fatal it can be. So David said he killed a lion and a bear. A lion and a bear are no little warriors, isn't it? They are the lion is the king of the jungle. Right? The bear is no less fierce. And so to defeat the lion and the bear, you need to have certain skill, isn't it? And so that skill against the agility of a lion and the strength of a bear was honed in the wilderness with the sheep, and that proved enough training, that proved enough practice to cause the enemy to be defeated once and for all. So Goliath died. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth, And so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. So the Philistine, the giant, fell upon his face to the earth. So that blow was so fatal that the giant didn't fall. Normally we are told, and at least I'm told, that you feel faint, you need to try to sit down, try to lie low, so that you don't collapse on your body weight. But here you see the enemy fell upon his head. In other words, he didn't have any consciousness anymore when that blow was struck. Just as it was when our Lord said, "It is finished," upon the cross. The enemy was defeated. And what was the enemy? The enemy for all of us is death. Death was defeated when Christ died, when he gave his last breath. The battle was won. It is finished. And here you see the enemy fell upon his face to the earth. In other words, he fell like that. Fell upon his face. He didn't fell on the side. He didn't bend his knees, but he fell flat upon his face. So it was a total defeat. The enemy was hit, and he couldn't. It was a immediate execution. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, and there was no sword in the hand of David. The battle was fought, and the battle was won. Verse 51. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. So he didn't have a weapon to even take off his head, but the weapon was borrowed from his adversary himself. So his adversary died upon his own weapon. What a battle it is, isn't it? You see how the Lord fights. The Lord saveth not with sword. He didn't need a sword. God would provide Goliath's sword. The enemy's sword would be used to kill himself, or to pronounce the total victory. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And so this was the picture of defeat. Psalm 64 verse 8. So they make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. All that see them shall flee away. David's victory over Goliath was typical of the triumphs of the Son of David over Satan and all the powers of darkness whom he spoiled and made a show of them openly. And we through him are more than conquerors. Indeed, the battle is the Lord's, and we fight it with the strength of the Lord. Verse 52. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. So Ekron was already in the Philistine territory. It was one of those 5 cities in which the Lord smote the people with emeralds. You remember when the ark was taken from them, and you see the victory that came. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Sha'araim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. So here you see the defeat of the Philistines' army. And the battle turned. Things changed. Israel was just moments before frightened, but now the Lord has allowed them to overturn and defeat their enemy. It was a joyous day, and the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines. Verse 53, and they spoiled their tents, and David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. It's interesting. And put his armor in his tent. Jerusalem. Jerusalem was not yet the capital of Israel, isn't it? But it was brought to Jerusalem, we are told here. And in their return from the chase, they seized all the baggage, plundered the tents, and the spoil the Lord gave to them. Verse 54, and David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. Here we see the memorial of the victory, the head of the enemy. Verse 55, and when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. Abner didn't know, because he's not a soldier. He was not enlisted to fight. Abner doesn't know who this man was, and he was there at the battlefield just to bring for his brothers who were enlisted soldiers food for them at the father's instruction. And so here Abner didn't know who this person was who defeated their enemy. And the king said, inquire whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son art thou, thou young man? And David said, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Who is Jesse? Well, Jesse was the son of Obed. And who is Obed? Well, Obed was the son of Ruth and Boaz, who was the Moabitess who returned from Moab with her mother-in-law Naomi to Bethlehem. And And if you read the last portion of the book of Ruth, you would see the genealogy traced all the way back to Perez, to Judah. And that will be the lineage of the Messiah, the son of David, that would come. And Bethlehem, the house of bread, where Christ would be born. A governor would come out of Judah, Bethlehem, Judah, Micah 5 verse 2. And you see here that Saul didn't even know who David was. You remember David was playing for him. He was there playing for him the harp when he was not well. Then he went back, and Saul couldn't even remember who he was. And it seemed, as Matthew Henry observed, that he was not really, or he has forgotten him, being melancholy and mindless. Little thinking that his musician would have spirit enough to be his champion, as Matthew Henry puts it. He was a stranger to Abner, the general of the Israeli army, but he was no stranger to the Lord, for it was of the Lord's doing, isn't it, that the enemy has to be defeated. And he will do so with the base things, the things that are not, to bring to naught the things that are. May the Lord bless His word to His own honor and glory. Amen.